Almost there. Look at this little guy. I can go. That didn't work. In case this paper airplane wasn't enough, I want to talk a bit about M.I.A. Her globally minded sophomore record, Kala, was the ultimate clapback against the xenophobia that defined the 2000s in oh so many ways. I'm Adit, this is No Vacuum. This is a channel where I talk about music every once in a while. If that's something that's interesting to you, then be sure to subscribe here. Trying to hit 100 subscribers by the end of March, and we are at the Ides of March, so that means that we only have a couple of days left. So be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share this with any of the people you think might care about this episode. M.I.A. got her first big break in a scene that would really build a foundation for where pop music would go in the 2000s and 2010s, with a lot of underground artists creating out-of-left field dance music that was built for a club unlike any other. People like LCD Soundsystem, Animal Collective, and Panda Bear, and The Rapture were using synths and dance influences in a way that went one step beyond the indie rock and post-punk revival that was popular in the early 2000s, crafting a new age dance sound that was equal parts Daft Punk and The Strokes, a new sound that would draw in audiences that were traditionally not really interested in what dance pop music had to offer.
M.I.A. was another artist on this trend, and when her debut Arular dropped in 2005, it put her on the map. And pop music soon began to take from the tricks that she brought on that record.
Tracks like Lil Mama's Lip Gloss and Fergie's London Bridge often drew comparisons to M.I.A., a testament to her influence, even if M.I.A. didn't really like the fact that they were copying her sound to begin with. M.I.A.'s game-changing influence also caught the attention of one of the biggest hit makers of the 2000s, Timbaland. Timbaland and M.I.A. announced that they were going to work together on M.I.A.'s sophomore record. What we would get from that collaboration we can only really see the remnants of on the track Come Around from Kala, but that really tells enough of the story. Timbaland's all-American R&B sound was tried and true throughout the 2000s. Not only was he able to make that work with popular artists like Justin Timberlake, but he also brought new folks into the fold like Nelly Furtado, whose 2006 record Loose totally turned her from this soft-spoken international star into a worldwide phenom out of this R&B sound that Timbaland helped really trademark throughout the decade. Instead of having the opportunity to work with Timbaland on her sophomore record, M.I.A. wasn't even able to enter the United States. She had her visa denied in 2006, and she alleges this is because of her political lyrics and her connections through her father to Sri Lankan Tamil revolutionaries. This visa situation prevented M.I.A. from working with Timbaland as planned, but it might have been a blessing in disguise given the record that we would get. M.I.A. traded Timbaland's all-American sound that defined 2000s pop for the sound of Diplo and Switch, two of her early collaborators in the British underground. With that shift came a global journey that M.I.A. would take with these producers to create a record unlike any other. M.I.A. traveled to Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, India, Australia, Liberia, and Angola to gather with collaborators in all of those places. This came on top of working with folks in the US and the UK, two places where she faced political scrutiny that prevented her from taking the creative path that she wanted to take. Spencer Kornheimer said that she traveled with an activist spirit, with M.I.A. herself saying that she wanted to create a bridge between the developed world and the developing world. A globally rooted art project like Kala could thrive on ambition alone, but Kala had carried even greater weight within the post-9/11 and decolonizing climate of the 2000s. The Western narrative around economic globalization really peaked in the 2000s, but some of this narrative sat in the belief that the market had begun to heal the wounds of American and European colonialism that had hindered this development prior to the century, when these wounds would be a lot more complicated to really deal with, and the 2000s were a constant reminder of that. These supposed crumbling walls of the global economy contrasted with the larger Western reckoning around the role that migration and multiculturalism would play in the world's future. American sentiment towards immigration in the 2000s really embodies this challenge quite well. Beyond the Islamophobia and xenophobia that arose culturally and politically after 9/11, tensions at the US-Mexico border really peaked, with 1 million migrant apprehensions taking place annually for much of the decade, and immigration really taking a front seat in the American psyche. I talked a lot about how unhinged the 2000s were in my video about Viva La Vida and Coldplay. You can find that somewhere. But these policy battles unhinged themselves directly in M.I.A.'s life. And the global tour that she took to create Kala was her way of fighting back and bringing along allies in her battles. M.I.A. leaned right into these tensions, bridging her background as a Sri Lankan Tamil refugee living in London with others who have seen colonial turmoil play out in their own lives. M.I.A. ended up building a triumphant record that elevated the voices of those the West wanted to keep out in the first place. She brought in samples from Tamil and Hindi movies produced in India, along with live percussion from Indian drummers. Her use of these samples calls to her background from South Asia, bringing her own influence and her own background to the table. In taking from her own stories, M.I.A. also creates really interesting opportunities with other collaborators who are telling their own stories about living in the colonized world. One great example of this is in her remix of the Wilcannia Mob's Downriver in her track Mango Pickle Downriver that comes there in the middle of Kala. The Wilcannia Mob are a hip-hop group whose song Downriver became really popular in the early 2000s. It told the story of Indigenous Australians living their day-to-day life and really was an icon of the Aboriginal experience. But M.I.A. infuses a little bit of her own experience as well as a little bit of politics into the fold. Some of her lines talk about serious topics, most prominent of which being meth addiction in rural Australia. The combination of elevating Aboriginal art and the challenges faced by the Aboriginal community exemplifies Kala's activist spirit. M.I.A. uses her platform to bring attention to community issues through the prominent voices from those communities. But of course, M.I.A. also brings her own experience and her own flavor to the track as well. The song itself calls to the mango pickle, a pretty common staple of South Asian cuisine, both in South Asia and wherever South Asians find themselves around the world. This call-out sees M.I.A. mirroring her own serious takes and in the lyrics that she has to offer, with the lightheartedness that the original Downriver brought to the table. It's this bridge between the colonized world and the Western world, and the serious and the lighthearted that shows M.I.A. and her collaborators really grappling with their experiences under the colonialism that defined the 20th century and many centuries before it. Legacies that continue to endure throughout the 2000s, and were particularly potent at the time M.I.A. was recording this record. In addition to building out references to the developing world and the colonized world and creating solidarity amongst them, M.I.A. also creates a connection to the Western audiences who are often listening to her music. She calls to American alternative rock with the Pixies reference on $20, along with calling to Baltimore Club with a Blaqstarr sample on World Town. Kala's global thrust reminded us of the challenges that have come with the world's reckoning with colonialism and the traumas associated with it. It does this by calling attention to the music that defines these complex regions of the world. M.I.A. doesn't call for any reconciliation or unity, but she uses her music as a way to call out the tensions and discomfort that come with dealing with this trauma around the world, and really forces Western audiences to take a deeper look at what their history might have brought onto others. Kala built on the momentum of Arular both creatively and commercially, but it was a reminder that M.I.A. calling to her own story brought out a series of sounds that only she could do and no one else could really replicate, another knock on all of those American pop singers who had started to replicate her sound. Now, Kala's success may not have been global pop star worthy, but it was far more successful than a lot of the underground dance artists I mentioned earlier, like LCD Soundsystem and Panda Bear, who had albums of their own that were game changers in 2007 that didn't sell nearly as well. On top of that, neither of those records had what M.I.A. had, in a worldwide chart-topping hit with Paper Planes. The success of Paper Planes saw M.I.A. finally clap back against pop copycats on her own accord, but its path to sleeper success was a really unique example of Kala's ethos in a lot of ways. She sarcastically riffs about the xenophobia that immigrants face on a regular basis in the Western world. The same xenophobia that probably led to M.I.A. not being able to enter the United States in the first place, leading her to create Kala in the way that she did. M.I.A. samples The Clash's Straight to Hell, a song that has a similar riff against British exceptionalism and supports immigrants broadly, serving as a bridge between M.I.A. and the protest music of the past. The song's construction really exemplified what Kala had to offer from front to back, but it also succeeded off of a marketing effort that put it in the hands of unique audiences and also saw it as a creative force that looked unlike any other track that was around at the time. If you were a college stoner or an underground junkie, there is that Pineapple Express trailer that really exemplified the song in its best ways. If you're a Bollywood stan or a South Asian like myself, Paper Planes made its way into the Slumdog Millonaire soundtrack that put M.I.A. on the same track listing as A.R. Rahman, one of the great Bollywood composers, who she also ended up collaborating with on that soundtrack. The song even earned a sample from Kanye, Jay-Z, and T.I. on their hit song Swagga Like Us, a track that allowed M.I.A. to flex her muscles as a hip-hop superstar, in addition to all of the other types of superstar that she had become in the early part of her career leading into college. This success across such diverse audiences played to the appetite that people had for a globally minded star like M.I.A. Kala set up the foundation for where the internet would take pop music in the 2010s. Just like M.I.A. did in gathering a global variety of sounds by traveling around the world, artists and fans spent the 2010s gaining inspiration from different domains of culture that were once seen as contradictory or conflicting. Kala's sound itself is really hard to replicate, but its inspirations really stand out to me. I mean, Charli XCX is a hard-to-place pop star whose progressive sound is as innovative as it is the result of bringing dynamic guests into the fold. Even hyperpop has a symbolic form factor that parallels M.I.A.'s globalist political pop music. Duos like 100 gecs turn the anxiety of the digital age into chaotic pop music that mixes up influences with the same frenetic energy as Kala.
There's a lot you can say about Kala's importance as a musical artifact, but ultimately,
shows the importance of just telling your own story and thinking outside the box. Not only does she carry her own stories throughout these records, but she also calls to experiences of those who have been through similar circumstances to her, creating something that tells important stories while also remaining accessible to the people who need to hear them the most. I'm Adit, this is No Vacuum. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can be on that list of people that I won't do anything specific for if you subscribe. I can, continue to make videos like these. Let me know what you're interested in learning more about. I am happy to consider video topics and just talk music in the comments. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.